Well, I think they've been having these discussions for some time in the US. We know about a month ago they put this before a congressional group, a Senate committee, where they discussed the potential of having a diplomatic boycott as opposed to a full-blown boycott where you would implicate the athletes in that. The discussion has always been around a way of making a statement without actually harming athletes who have put, sometimes lifelong dedication into that one particular moment of competing at an Olympic Games. So the message that would be sent was that, diplomats, high-ranking officials, heads of state would not turn up to be guests at an Olympic Games in Beijing because of the treatment of China of the Uyghur minority in Xinjiang province.
But how effective is a diplomatic, effectively just sanctioning heads of state and diplomats versus actually going for the sport itself?
Well, we know that it does send a message. Of course, it would be a much bigger message if it was a complete boycott and athletes weren't there, but that ends up harming the athletes because one thing we need to keep in perspective here is that, when boycotts are discussed for things like the Olympic Games, there's never an equal boycott of business with these countries. So, for instance, the USA still has a business relationship, however strained, with China. The same when we have discussions here and other countries. The UK has also been discussing a similar sort of diplomatic boycott. So the athletes have always argued it's very unfair to penalise them when in fact very little changes. However, when a country puts so many millions of dollars, billions of dollars in fact, into hosting something like a Winter or Summer Olympic Games or the World Cup soccer, we saw a similar thing happen in Moscow in 2018 with the FIFA World Cup, and that is the dignitaries that don't come, there are empty seats in the main stands, there are empty seats at the final, there are empty seats at the opening ceremonies, and that does send somewhat of a message, and it is somewhat embarrassing for those host nations that heads of state and dignitaries of that magnitude have not come.
We've seen sanctions against boycotts of Olympic Games before. Moscow was a perfect example. How effective are they really in changing any human rights issues?
I think that's a really good question, Bev, and I think if you look back through sanctions over time, you would have to say that perhaps the only one that really had any kind of dramatic effect was South Africa, when it was banned from taking part in international sporting events such as the Olympic Games for that period during apartheid, and then seeing the end of that, and they were welcomed back into the international sporting fold. But it's not something that sport can do on its own. And as much as, many people around the world and even sometimes the Olympics themselves like to hold themselves above everything and being bigger and better than everything, there is a limit to what they can actually do. But when it's done in concert with, business deals, with trade sanctions, with political sanctions, then you have a whole of picture, don't you? That's when you can actually have a real impact.
And it's a double standard in a way if it only targets it, as you say, in this narrow focus. There's also a double standard in that countries like North Korea are allowed to send delegations. Other countries with human rights abuses, in fact, are encouraged to and sometimes penalised if they don't send delegations.
Yeah, I think this is one of the unique aspects of the Olympic Games particularly, and a lot of people don't understand this, that if we look at something like the Australian Olympic Committee, it's based in Australia. People think that is of the people, that it is, Australia's people, taxpayer money, all of that. We pick our teams and we send them off to the International Olympic Committee's International Olympic Games. In fact, the AOC and every single National Olympic Committee in every country around the world is actually an office of the IOC, and they like to exist outside domestic politics, and they also have a rule that if there's any interference through domestic politics with the workings of National Olympic Committees, then they can be suspended and kept out of Olympic meetings, Olympic Games, etc. So it's a situation also where Rex Patrick has been quite vocal on this. He would like to see a boycott of the Winter Olympics in Beijing, but discussions have already been had between the AOC and the government here in Australia basically suggesting that if that was ever pushed onto the Australian Olympic team, there would be great jeopardy for the 2032 Brisbane Olympic Games, because the IOC does not take kindly to that sort of political interference.
Yeah, that is fascinating. So no surprise really that we are seeing both the IOC and the US Olympic Committee resisting these kind of calls.
Yeah, and the resistance from their part is very much concerned with the athletes. They don't want to see any country not send a team of athletes because that would embarrass their international Olympic Games. However, even John Coates, who was a vice president of the IOC and the president of the Australian National Olympic Committee, said in an interview with me about a week ago that he understands that at a diplomatic level, at a government level, discussions like this can take place about things like a diplomatic boycott, but they definitely can't stray into that region of impacting on the athletes, because we know that that never succeeds in the way that it is planned to.
Good to get your insights on this, Tracey. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Beverly.